The pristine white tablecloth halted in mid-air as Melissa Carter's eyes suddenly narrowed. She froze, stunned, as if she had just witnessed something out of place, something that should not exist in the luxurious world of first class. It lasted only a brief moment, but it was enough to cast a suffocating silence over the usually tranquil cabin of Zenith Air Flight Bonhomme High. A black man was sitting in seat High A. In Melissa's eyes, that alone was wrong. Wrong from more than meters away. No one in the cabin heard her faint, sharp inhale, but Ethan Brooks did. He felt it like a cold blade gliding across his skin, an instinct sharpened by decades spent in rooms where power did not always welcome people like him. First class glowed under a soft, golden wash from the elegant ceiling lights. The scent of sandalwood blended with aged wine, creating an atmosphere of quiet extravagance. A tech executive flipped through the Financial Times, a Swiss investor sipped white wine, and a supermodel absent-mindedly chose an Instagram filter. They all belonged in this world, at least through Melissa's eyes. Ethan, however, was nothing but a smear of ink on a white silk canvas. He sat upright, his charcoal grey suit tailored perfectly to his broad shoulders. His black Oxford shoes gleamed like a cold mirror. His hair was neatly trimmed, a touch of silver at the temples. He was bon years old, carrying the calmness only those who had already survived life's storms possessed. Yet Melissa saw none of that. She only saw a man she didn't believe was qualified to sit in that seat. She pulled a professional smile onto her face, but it was sharp, almost blade-like. Then she walked over. So Melissa's voice rang slightly louder than necessary, deliberately catching the attention of nearby passengers as if she needed witnesses for what she was about to say. "Can I help you?" It was not a question. It was an accusation. Ethan looked up, his gaze steady, serene, like a still lake. He was familiar with this type of greeting questions, coated in pretend politeness, but still reeking of prejudice. "I'm fine, thank you," he answered in a calm, deep voice, offering nothing more than needed. Melissa tilted her head, lips curling. "This is first class. Economy is in the back, sir." The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop. One passenger stopped reading. Another glanced over, pretending not to care, while curiosity flickered in their eyes. Ethan did not bow his head. He had never bowed to injustice. "I know," he replied slowly. "My seat is High A." Melissa raised an eyebrow, as if he had just told a ridiculous joke. She held out her hand. "Boarding pass, please." Her tone was sharp as shattered glass. Ethan handed over his pass without a second of hesitation. He was all too familiar with having to justify his presence in spaces that were silently labeled "not for him." Melissa inspected the pass, as if searching for signs of counterfeiting, flipping it, squinting, holding it close. Every motion exposed the assumption she had already made, an assumption fed by bias and the tiny authority stitched into her uniform. Finally, she nodded reluctantly. "Looks correct." But passengers sometimes get confused. Her unfinished sentence carried the unmistakable scent of disdain. She walked away, leaving behind a silence heavy as lead. Ethan inhaled deeply. He had faced situations like this countless times, in restaurants, hotels, boardrooms, and even the very places where he invested his money. But this time, he had no idea the moment would shake an entire $23 billion empire. He pushed the emotion aside and pressed play on his favorite cello track, letting the warm notes swirl around his chest. This was supposed to be a rare moment of rest after the toughest deal of the quarter. But a few minutes later, a tap on the shoulder ripped the calm apart. Melissa again. Her face wore the rigid confidence of someone convinced they had unquestionable power. "So your briefcase, it cannot stay under the seat. It must go into the overhead compartment." Ethan opened his eyes and looked down. The small leather briefcase sat neatly in the exact approved position, far smaller than the backpack beside it. He replied calmly, "It's in the correct place." "No, sir." "It is dangerous. All large bags must be placed above." "That is not a large bag." Melissa did not look at the briefcase. She only looked at him with the silent intention of putting him in the place she believed he belonged. Ethan knew this game well. The tiny authority people like Melissa carried could become a weapon in the hands of those who held prejudice. He considered his options. If he argued, he would instantly be labeled difficult or aggressive, a trap he had encountered his entire life. Finally, he stood, lifted the briefcase, and placed it overhead, moving slowly, deliberately, a silent message. "I'm doing this not because you're right, but because I refuse to let you win the way you want to win." "Thank you for your cooperation," Melissa said, though her voice carried a salty hint of hostility. Ethan sat back down, trying to recover his peace. But now the cello sounded like a tightened string about to snap, and he thought, "It's all right. Let it tighten a little more. When it snaps, that is when an empire pays the price." But he didn't know that only minutes later, everything would explode in a way he never expected. And that explosion would not only change this flight, it would change the ownership of all Zenith Air and even its parent company Apex Holdings. As those thoughts brushed through his mind, Melissa returned for the third time. Her eyes carried the familiar tension of someone about to abuse their power. "Turn off your phone," she ordered, her voice sharp as a blade. "Now. Immediately." Ethan looked up, and in that moment, a battle began with one simple sentence. "You're crossing the line." The moment Ethan lifted his head, time seemed to shatter. Melissa stood there with her arms, crossed her eyes, filled with that small but poisonous kind of authority, the kind that people like her always abused when they felt protected by their uniform. Around them, the wealthy passengers in first class tilted their heads, quietly observing as if they were watching a small play that had nothing to do with them. They sipped wine, adjusted pillows, pretended to be polite, yet behind their eyes flickered a thin spark of curiosity laced with judgment. No one stepped in. No one asked what was happening, because to them the black man in seat high A was probably trouble. Ethan placed his phone on the table, producing a soft, sharp click like a lock snapping into place. "I am switching to airplane mode," he said, calmly, showing Melissa the screen with the little airplane icon. But Melissa did not look at the screen. She looked directly at him, at the man she believed was disturbing her world. "You were told to turn it off earlier," she said, her voice raised just enough to make several passengers turn fully around. "And your attitude has been extremely uncooperative." Ethan heard the word attitude, a word that seemed harmless, but cut like a blade. A word often used to smear people like him in moments exactly like this. "I have not been uncooperative," he answered evenly. "I followed the rules." But Melissa did not want rules. She wanted victory. She straightened shoulders lifted in challenge. "I will call the captain." A small sentence, but it landed like a death sentence in the pressurized air of first class. Ethan knew the situation had just crossed the boundary of reason. This was no longer about enforcing policy. This was a personal confrontation wrapped in the thin shell of authority. He took a breath. "Not afraid. just tired. He had spoken with presidents, negotiated with the sharpest minds on Wall Street, faced pressure far greater than this. Yet he had never felt as weary as he did now, forced once again to prove he deserved the seat he had paid for in full. Melissa spun around sharply. The cockpit door swung open, and then the man stepped out. Captain Warren Hale, nam moi so toi square jaw, cold flat eyes. He walked as if the entire airplane relied on each step he took. It was the posture of someone used to commanding, used to obedience, used to having his voice be the final verdict. Melissa whispered a few words into his ear. He did not ask further. He did not verify. He did not look around to check the truth. He only looked at Ethan as if he were a problem. Ethan recognized that look. It belonged to people who believed the crew was always right, no matter the facts. Sir Captain Hale said, his voice steady and cold. "I have been informed that you caused a disturbance and refused to follow crew instructions." "That information is false," Ethan replied immediately. First class fell silent again. Even the sound of breathing seemed to vanish. Captain Hale cut him off with a raised hand, heavy with authority. Here, he said, his voice smooth like metal. "The crew is the first line of defense. If they feel threatened or unsafe, it is my duty to act. We cannot take off with a disruptive passenger." Ethan met his eyes. "You are acting based on an assumption, not the truth." Hale did not blink, did not change expression. "We are not debating this, sir. You need to leave the aircraft." The words dropped like a hammer, final and absolute, crushing any hope of a reasonable resolution. For the smallest moment, barely a fraction of a second, Ethan's gaze flickered, not from fear, not from anger, but from a deep, familiar disappointment, a feeling he had tasted far too many times. Again. The same cycle, the same underestimation, the same judgment from a single glance. He felt the weight of years of building his career, the achievements he fought for, the degrees on his wall, all of it invisible to people like Melissa and Hale. They did not see the founder of North Star Capital. They did not see a man who owned multiple Fortune 2 tram companies. They only saw his skin and a first-class seat that looked wrong. 2 airport security officers appeared at the end of the cabin. No one spoke, but their presence made it clear Ethan had no choice. He stood up. No one helped him. No one defended him. Melissa watched him with visible satisfaction. Captain Hale stood firm, trying to appear emotionless, but inside there was a glint of smugness. This was the kind of situation he was used to handling: shut down, trouble, protect, order. Only Ethan understood what they failed to see. He had been insulted, dismissed and condemned without a chance to defend himself. But they did not know one thing. He held the power to destroy their careers, not by shouting, but with strategy, with money, with control over their parent company. Ethan bent down, picked up his coat, straightened his sleeves, every motion soft but heavy with meaning. Before leaving the cabin, he looked directly at Captain Hale. "You are making a mistake you will not understand until it is far too late." Hale did not respond. Melissa pressed her lips together in satisfaction. The 2 security officers stepped closer. As Ethan crossed the boundary between first class and the rest of the plane, the eyes of economy passengers followed him. Some looked sympathetic, some mildly curious, a few judgmental. None of them knew that the man they watched being escorted off the plane was going to own the airline in a few months. None of them knew his silence was not surrender. It was preparation for a much larger battle. A battle Ethan intended to win. Not with noise, but with real power. He stepped into the jet bridge, the cool air rushing against his face, sweeping away the last traces of humiliation. And in that moment, Ethan Brooks vowed, if they wanted to see his real place, he would show them. Not on an airplane, but in the chairman's seat of Apex Holdings, the $20 billion empire they never imagined someone like him could touch, and the price for today's disrespect would echo all the way to the highest floors of the corporation. A storm had begun to form, and Ethan was its center. The blast of cold air from the JFK terminal ventilation hit Ethan Brooks in the face, like a slap, not a slap of humiliation, but a slap of awakening. He walked with a calmness that anyone watching might mistake for resignation, but deep in his dark eyes, a silent storm was gathering. 2 security officers followed him a few steps behind, neither touching him. They were simply following procedure. And it was exactly that polite indifference that chilled him more than the icy air from the vents. A wealthy businessman, a powerful executive, a man who had walked into boardrooms with ministers and global CEOs, was now being escorted like a disruptive passenger. No, there was nothing acceptable about this, but Ethan remained silent. Because silence is always more frightening than shouting, especially when it comes from a man with the power to alter the future of an entire corporation. When the automatic doors slid open, Terminal 4 unfolded before him under a wash of cold white light. People moved in every direction, business travelers dragging suitcases, children crying, endless flight announcements echoing overhead. Ethan stopped in the middle of the hallway, hands tucked into his coat pockets. The security officers gave a short nod and walked away. They had no reason to hold him anymore. The situation was handled. To Zenith Air, he was just a problem removed from the plane. To Ethan, this was an invitation to war. He pulled out his phone and opened his contacts. His finger stopped at one name, Rachel Nguyen, Chief Operating Officer of North Star Capital. Ba Moi Sao, years old, sharp as a scalpel, unfailingly loyal, the kind of woman who never asked, why only asked, what needed to be done. He made the call. The line connected after 2 rings. Ethan. Aren't you supposed to be on the flight? Rachel asked, her voice direct as always. Ethan looked through the glass wall toward the Zenith Air flight, Bon Nam Ho, still reflecting the runway lights. I am not going anymore, he said, his tone so calm that Rachel instantly fell silent to hear what lay beneath it. What happened? She asked, her voice lower, now more alert. Ethan answered with 4 words. Prepare the campaign. No explanation, no recounting. Rachel immediately understood the gravity. Which target, she asked. Zenith Air, Ethan said. And Apex Holdings as well. On the line, Rachel drew a sharp breath. You want to buy them? Ethan closed his eyes. The image of Melissa's condescending smile, Captain Hale's emotionless stare, and the judgmental whispers of the other passengers burned clearly through his mind. Not just buy, he said slowly. I want to dismantle the entire system that made people like them think they have the right to step on someone based solely on skin color. Rachel did not respond right away. She knew Ethan never acted from impulse. If he said it is time, then he had already made the decision. And when Ethan Brooks decided, the financial world shifted. Okay, Rachel said, after a heavy pause. What do you need first? Book me a suite at the Langford Hotel. Then call Adrian. Meet me there in 1 hour. Are you all right? Ethan looked into the glass reflection of himself. Calm, cold, sharp. I am all right, he said. They are the ones who will not be. When he ended the call, The afternoon sunlight pierced through the large windows, scattering golden sparks across the terminal. They glimmered on his suit across his eyes, as if the universe itself was marking his silent vow. Ethan turned and walked each step, landing with the invisible weight of determination. No one in the terminal knew that the man they had just passed was preparing to change the fate of tens of thousands of employees, millions of passengers, and a corporation worth more than $1 billion. 1 hour later, the presidential suite of the Langford Hotel glowed under soft golden light, the windows opening toward Central Park, sinking into sunset. Adrian Cole Bonmoabe, years-old chief legal officer of North Star Capital, known as the Shark in a suit, stood by the window. Rachel stood at the desk, laptop open, ready. Ethan walked in. No one asked what happened. They simply waited. And Ethan told them. No embellishing, no softening. Each detail fell like shards of broken glass across the room. When he reached the line, "It's always people like him." Rachel's hand clenched until her knuckles turned white. Adrian turned away, jaw tightening. The anger of intelligent, powerful people burned quieter, but far hotter than any scream. When Ethan finished, silence filled the suite. No one dared say anything trivial in a moment like this. Finally, Adrian spoke. "This is a lawsuit worth hundreds of millions of dollars. We can know Ethan cut him off, eyes fixed on the view outside. Money isn't enough to teach this lesson." "I know what you want," Rachel said quietly. "You want a structural punishment." Ethan turned back his eyes like steel forged under fire. "I want them to live inside the consequences of the choice they made today." Adrian frowned. "Zenith Air is owned by Apex Holdings. Apex is massive, Ethan. Really massive." "Good," Ethan said. "The bigger it is, the harder it falls." Rachel placed her hands on the keyboard. "Where do we begin?" Ethan stepped closer and pointed at the laptop screen. "Get me the full file on Apex Holdings' debt partners, structure, vulnerabilities, major shareholders, legal disputes, and find out who on the board has issues with Charles Whitford." Adrian let out a short laugh, the kind that cut like a blade. "You're planning to bring down an entire empire over a rogue flight attendant and an arrogant captain." Ethan looked directly into his eyes. "Not because of them," he said softly, but with icy precision. "Because of the system that made them believe they had the right to do that." The room fell into silence again, a silence heavy like a velvet curtain dropping before a grand performance. Rachel spoke. "This isn't a small retaliation. This is a full-scale campaign, real war." Ethan nodded. "Then we will fight quietly until they realize who they should have feared." As Rachel and Adrian began their work, Ethan stood alone by the window, gazing at the lights of New York City flickering to life like scattered embers. He placed a hand over his chest, not to check his heartbeat, but to remind himself of one thing he would not let today's moment drown in the silence the system expected. He would make it the spark, and when the fire spread, even those hiding in the shadows would have to see the light. Somewhere in the first-class cabin of the plane, Ethan had just been removed from Melissa, was still standing confidently believing she had won. She did not yet know she had just lit a fuse on the one man in the entire nation capable of buying the very company that paid her salary. That explosion was coming. Soon. 3 hours after the humiliating removal from Zenith Air flight, Bon Num High, in the top suite of the Langford Hotel, an invisible storm was forming. No wind, no lightning yet, The energy inside that room was powerful enough to begin shaking a $20 billion corporation. Rachel Nguyen sat in front of her laptop, typing so fast the keystrokes sounded like hail hitting a tin roof. Meanwhile, Adrian Cole, the chief legal officer, paced the floor like a caged tiger, his eyes sharp as blades. At the center of the room stood Ethan Brooks, straight-backed, his gaze cut through the glass wall as if he could already see the entire Apex holding structure sprawling beneath him. No anger, no trembling, only the quiet tightening of iron will around a single target. Ethan, Apex data is in, Rachel said, turning the laptop toward him. The screen displayed a tangled maze of subsidiary companies, partner firms, pension funds, and convoluted financial chains, all making up the skeleton of the Apex empire. Ethan glanced once, only once, but his eyes captured the entire picture. "Where is the weak point?" he asked. Rachel enlarged a chart. Apex has 4 major divisions: aviation through Zenith Air, Grand Meridian Hotels, Atlantic Line, Marine Logistics, and the Regal Life luxury service chain. She tapped a pale red box. "Here, the internal pension fund. It is severely underfunded." Ethan did not move. Rachel continued, her voice cold, like she was reading an indictment. They used artificial profit projections to report to the committee, keeping payouts lower than required. The pension deficit is approximately $8.4 billion. Adrian let out a long whistle. Good Lord, how long has Charles Whitford been playing this game? Rachel switched the view to a year-by-year graph. More than a decade. They covered it by inflating Apex's stock value and using that as collateral. Ethan nodded. Meaning if Apex stock drops significantly, the pension fund is standing at the edge of a cliff. Rachel looked at him, her expression serious. Exactly. One well-placed media strike, and the entire Apex system shakes. The air in the room changed instantly, thickening like the moment before a storm breaks. Adrian leaned on the table. "So you are planning to expose them?" Ethan did not answer right away. He walked to the window, brushing his fingers lightly across the cold glass. Below New York glowed one golden light at a time. "We are not exposing," he said slowly. "We are just opening the door so the light can reach where they kept the darkness." Then he turned back his eyes, sharp like carved obsidian. "And so they understand what it feels like to be judged by appearances." Adrian looked at Rachel. Rachel looked back. Both understood Ethan was not acting for personal ego. He was acting because a system had existed far too long on privilege and prejudice. "First step," Ethan said. "We accumulate shares." Adrian narrowed his eyes. "How much do you plan to acquire?" "As much as possible," Ethan replied, but silently. Rachel gave a faint smile. "Under 5% does not require disclosure." "Correct," Ethan said. "We set up around 20 shell companies. Each will buy 0.1 to 0.4%. No consistent pattern, no sudden volume spikes." Adrian chuckled softly. "Ethan, you really want to play the ghost?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "In this battlefield, noise only gives the enemy time to prepare. I do not want them prepared." Rachel opened a draft file for new legal entities. "I can register corporations in Cayman, Panama, Luxembourg, and Liechtenstein, all within 24 hours. "Do it," Ethan said. Later, while Rachel and Adrian divided tasks, Ethan stepped onto the balcony, letting the cold wind brush against his cheek. The city below sparkled like an endless map of lights. But among all that beauty, Ethan thought only of one sentence. It's always people like him. That sentence coming from a senior flight attendant who believed she knew class was the small stone that set the entire mountain sliding. Melissa had no idea who she had touched. And because she didn't know, she felt no fear. People locked into old power structures like Captain Hale and Charles Whitford all share one mistake: they believe their authority is permanent. But real power does not lie in the loudest voice. It lies in the quiet choices made by people capable of changing the entire board. That was Ethan Brooks. Rachel opened the balcony door and stepped out. "Ethan," she said softly, "I am tracking Apex's major shareholders." Here she handed him her phone. A long list appeared: investment funds, international pension funds, financial institutions, private shareholders. Ethan scanned it, stopping at one name. Susan Markley, Bon Moorchin, years old, board member, removed from the CEO position of Regal Life after clashing with Charles Whitford. "This one," Ethan said. "She is the key." Rachel nodded. "She is known to despise Whitford, but she has never had enough votes to act." Ethan gave a slight smile. "We will give her enough." "You plan to speak with her directly?" Rachel asked. "Yes," Ethan replied. "A woman like her does not respond to promises. She responds to strategy." "And your objective?" Rachel pressed. Ethan looked at his reflection in the glass. "My objective," he said quietly, "is to make all of Apex face the truth. They have avoided their airline, mistreated the wrong man." A cold breeze swept by. New York gleamed beneath him like a massive chessboard. And he, the man who had been kicked off a plane 3 hours earlier, was preparing to reset every piece. No shouting, no arguing, no pounding fists, just one plan. A plan as precise, cold, and silent as the dark, but once revealed, powerful enough to make an empire stagger. Rachel watched him for a long moment. "Ethan," she said softly, "are you sure you are doing this for the right reason?" Ethan turned. "Rachel," he said, his voice low but bright, "if we do not do it, who will?" She did not answer. She did not have to. In that moment, the three of them, Ethan, Rachel, Adrian, were no longer CEO, COO, or attorney. They were comrades, standing on the same battlefield, fighting a rotten system. And at that exact moment, Apex Holdings, Zenith Air, Charles Whitford, Captain Hale, and Melissa Carter had no idea an invisible army had just declared war on them. The campaign began that very night. No gunfire, no shouting, only the soft clatter of keyboards, the rustle of shifting papers, the click of a mouse. Yet each sound echoed like the footsteps of a revolution, drawing near, very near. The first month passed in a silence so deep it was almost frightening. No one knew. No one suspected. No one sensed that a massive financial war was unfolding right in the heart of the world's largest trading floors. In the quiet night of Manhattan, inside the highly secured basement of North Star Capital's headquarters, a restricted zone where only a handful of people had clearance, Operation Spectre had begun. The name Rachel chose was not random. A Spectre meant ghost, an unseen, soundless force, powerful enough to make an empire tremble. Ethan stood before the massive screen, displaying the price chart of Apex Holdings. His eyes reflected the pale blue light like a blade drawn from its sheath. Rachel reported, "The shell companies are ready. A total of 20 SAO legal entities, registered in Cayman, Luxembourg, Panama, and Malta. Everything is in position." Adrian sat with one leg crossed, twirling his silver pen between his fingers. "So when do we start buying?" Ethan said one word. "Tonight." They began with small trades, extremely small. One anonymous Cayman company bought 0.18%. A Luxembourg shell acquired 0.12%. A Panama entity took 0.24%. Each number was scattered, separated, devoid of any recognizable pattern. No one paid attention. No investment fund caught it. No market algorithm flagged it as unusual. And that was exactly what Ethan wanted. Ash, the head of North Star's trading desk, stared at the monitors, his voice trembling slightly. At this pace, we can accumulate 4.9% within 8 weeks without anyone noticing. Ethan did not leave the chart. 4.9% is only the beginning. Ash's heartbeat quickened, not from fear, but from exhilaration. He knew Ethan never aimed for something small. Ethan aimed only for things that changed the game. While the shell companies quietly gathered shares, Rachel and her analysis team dug deeper into the rotting core of Apex, the pension fund. On day Moi Chin of the operation, during a snowy night, Rachel rushed into the strategy room with a thick stack of documents. "Ethan, I found it." Ethan set down his coffee cup, found what Rachel opened the spreadsheet. The Apex Pension Fund, it's not just underfunded. It is on the brink of collapse. Adrian immediately sat upright, his silver pen dropping from his hand. Rachel went on. "They have been using employee contributions to patch fake profits. Each quarter, Whitford painted better results by cutting the corporation's payments into the pension system." Ethan asked, meaning. Rachel inhaled deeply. "Meaning if Apex stock falls another 8%, the fund will no longer be solvent, and the government will have to intervene." The room froze. Ethan closed his eyes for a few seconds. Then he said, "We can show the world exactly what this is." That night, Ethan called an old contact, an investigative journalist from the Financial Herald, Michael Donovan. They met at a dimly lit bar, sitting in a hidden corner, like Cold War spies. Michael asked bluntly, "You did not call me to chat." "What is this about?" Ethan placed a USB drive on the table. "Everything you need to blow Apex Holdings wide open is in here." Michael remained silent for a few seconds. His expression grew serious. "Ethan, this level of information could shake the entire market." "Yes," Ethan said, "and it is time." Michael studied him, understanding this was not some petty personal revenge. There was something heavier in Ethan's voice, something deeper, something every underestimated person knew too well. "So what do you want me to write?" Michael asked. "Write the truth," Ethan replied. "Nothing more, nothing less." Michael nodded. "Then prepare yourself. After this article, there will be no turning back." "Perfect," Ethan said quietly. 3 days later, 7:45 in the morning, the entire global financial market seemed to choke for exactly 1 second before chaos erupted. The front page of the Financial Herald read, "Apex Holdings on the brink pension fund, shortfall at $8.4 billion, systemic collapse risk rises." Using the numbers Rachel provided, Michael exposed the full scale of the crisis. But the final paragraph caused the real shock. Multiple internal sources confirm that Apex chairman Charles Whitford knowingly concealed the true deficit for years. The market exploded. Apex fell 6%, then 9%, then 12%. Funds began dumping shares. Investors panicked. Financial news outlets pushed alerts every minute. Charles Whitford, having breakfast with fellow CEOs at an exclusive London club, nearly dropped his teacup. Impossible, how could this happen? Who did this? His voice shook like a strained string. One executive beside him sighed. It came from somewhere deep inside. Someone with access to information only top leadership would have. Whitford stood up abruptly, his face drained of color. "Find out who did this. At any cost." But the real question was who was attacking Apex. And why Whitford had no clue. Could not have known. Because the person responsible was sitting more than 4,000 miles away in a dark conference room, calmly watching Apex's stock price crash. At North Star's operations floor, the strategy team erupted in cheers as the stock hit its lowest point in 6 months. Ash shouted, "We are about to secure 9% of total shares at a massive discount." Adrian laughed. "Whitford is probably drowning himself in whiskey right now." Rachel looked at Ethan. And Ethan simply said, "Keep buying." His voice was so cold the room went silent. "No more jokes." Rachel spoke softly. "Ethan, you are not doing this to get back at Melissa, right?" Ethan turned toward her, his gaze deep as a bottomless well. "No, I am not punishing her. I am punishing the system that created her." Silence. Heavy. Loaded. Over the next 48 hours, as Apex plunged into chaos, North Star Capital, through its fleet of shell companies, acquired another 11% of shares. The entire process happened without anyone noticing. No one realized the shell companies shared one ultimate owner. No one connected the tiny scattered trades. No one saw the ghost hand tightening around Apex's throat. In total, after 2 relentless months, the final number reached an impossible height. Ethan had secured 15.7% of Apex holdings. Quietly. Invisibly. Rachel stared at the number, goosebumps rising along her arms. "Ethan, with this, you are the largest shareholder." Adrian exhaled a long breath. "You just became the man Whitford will fear the most." Ethan looked at the screen, at the chaotic stock chart, at the red lines slashing across the Empire's failing body. Then he spoke the most important sentence of this phase. "Tonight we begin Phase 2. Rachel asked, "And what is Phase 2? Ethan answered, his voice, deep like a war drum, destroying confidence. "So they understand that when they kicked me out of Seat High, they kicked out the wrong man." 6 weeks after the explosive article about the Apex Holdings pension scandal, the entire European financial market felt suspended in mid-air. No one knew what was happening. Analysts speculated wildly. Rumors spread everywhere, from short-selling attacks to financial espionage to Middle Eastern shadow money. Only one truth remained unknown. The storm that was coming was led by the man who had once been thrown out of Seat High A. Ethan Brooks arrived at Geneva Airport wearing a deep brown coat, his shoes polished enough to reflect the terminal lights. Snow drifted gently across the runway, painting everything white. But his heart was ice cold. Geneva was the stronghold of private meetings, a place where CEOs and global power players moved markets with a single call. And today, Ethan was not here to meet a CEO. He was here to meet the woman capable of shattering Apex Holdings' board from the inside. Susan Markley, Bonmoor Chin, years old. Sharp, uncompromising, and above all she despised Charles Whitford. She was the keynote speaker at the Global Women Leadership Summit, and Ethan knew that if he wanted to topple the Apex chairman, he needed someone on the inside. He needed a blade hidden beneath the cloak. The Montreux Hotel hosting the summit looked like a modern palace with high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, pale gold walls, and wealthy guests in tailored suits exuding a quiet, dangerous kind of power. Susan Markley stepped out of the conference hall having just finished her speech on corporate transparency. Her light brown hair was tied neatly, her face elegant, but cold like dawn frost over the Alps. Ethan approached, not rushed, not hesitant, confident, but never flaunting the energy of someone who did not need to prove anything. Ms. Markley. Susan turned her eyes, slicing from his shoes to his shoulders in exactly 1 second. In that instant, Ethan knew she recognized him. "Mr. Brooks," she said, raising an eyebrow. "I didn't expect to see you here. I thought you were busy setting half of the American financial market on fire." Ethan smiled faintly, only burning the rotten parts. Susan studied him for another breath, then smiled the way someone smiles before a conversation they've been waiting years to have. "Then say it, Ethan," she said. "You're here because of Apex, because of Whitford, because of the truth," Ethan replied. Susan let out a soft, sharp laugh, the kind that sounded like glasses clinking at a party filled with secrets. They sat in a private lounge room, warm yellow lights, white tablecloths, red wine reflecting the sharpness in Susan's eyes. Ethan placed a black folder on the table, not thick, but heavy like a weight. "This is the Apex Pension Fund," Ethan said, "and what Whitford has been hiding." Susan opened it, flipped a few pages. Her eyes widened. "You're joking. These figures, they're real, completely." Susan placed the folder down and leaned back, arms crossed. "Then Apex isn't just on the brink. Whitford is dragging thousands of employees off the cliff with him." Ethan said nothing. He didn't need to. She understood. Susan nodded bitterly. "I warned them, warned Whitford, warned the board." "Do you know what they told me?" Ethan waited. "They said, 'Susan, don't worry. This is how we've done business for 40 years. Her voice hardened. 40 years built on deception. Ethan said quietly, "And now everything is about to collapse." Susan stared at him. "So what do you want me to do?" Ethan sat straighter and set his wine glass down. "I want you to be the blade inside the boardroom. I want you to support a vote of no confidence against Whitford." Susan gave a brief laugh. "And you think I alone can do that?" "No," Ethan said. "I already hold 15.7% and I'm still accumulating. But I need someone internal, someone neutral shareholders will listen to." "Why me?" Susan asked. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. No arrogance, no pressure, just truth. "Because you hate him," Ethan said slowly. "Because you see Apex's future being strangled. And because you are the only one on the board with the intelligence and integrity to rebuild it." Susan fell silent. The distant sounds of the conference drifted in faint laughter, footsteps, clinking glasses, all feeling far away. Finally she asked Ethan, "What do you want?" "Truly want." Ethan rested his hands on the table, eyes sharp like a freshly forged blade. "I want to pull Apex out of Whitford's outdated era. I want Zenith Air to become an airline people can be proud of, not a place that discards customers, because they do not fit someone's bias. And I want no one, absolutely no one, to endure what I went through." Susan stared at him for a long time. Then a slow smile formed, the kind of smile that marks the beginning of a historic decision. "You will have my vote, Ethan." Ethan smiled. "Thank you." Susan stood and extended her hand. "But one thing," she said, "when this war starts, it will be brutal. And if you fail, I fall with you." Ethan shook her hand firmly. "I do not fail," he said. "I didn't come here to compete. I came to change." Susan released his hand and delivered the final line, one that froze the air in the room. "Then let's start the war, Ethan." When Susan left, Ethan remained staring at the golden light shimmering in his unfinished glass of wine. He knew this was no longer a plan. This was a winter war, and Ethan had just gained the strongest ally on the inside. Outside the window, Geneva snow fell like pale ashes, and Ethan Brooks, the man once thrown out of seat, High A, was preparing the next blow, the one that would make the entire Apex leadership tremble. Not tomorrow. Not next week. But at the upcoming emergency shareholder meeting, a meeting where a new name would stand at the center of power. His name. When Ethan Brooks boarded the flight back to New York after the meeting in Geneva, the snow had stopped falling. But inside his mind, a storm was forming, a storm not born from weather, but from metal documents shares and the pride of people standing at the top of power. Susan Markley had chosen to stand with him. That was not just a vote. It was a blade thrust from inside Apex Holdings. Now only one step remained. Make the entire Apex board terrified enough to open the door to overthrow Charles Whitford. In his old oak office in London, Apex chairman Charles Whitford was living in a fear he had not felt once in 30 years as a titan of industry. His hand, once steady as he signed multi-billion-dollar contracts, now trembled slightly as he held the shareholder report. Apex down another percent today. Pension funds are demanding an emergency meeting. The press refuses to let go. The chief financial officer read the numbers in a calm voice, but his face was pale. Whitford slammed his hand on the desk. Impossible. Who is doing this? Who is attacking us? No one answered, because they all knew one thing: this was no ordinary attack. Silent trades, leaked information with perfect accuracy, a strike directly at the weakest point, the pension fund, and most frightening of all, the silence of the one behind it. One board member stuttered. It may be an American investment fund. They are not disclosing anything, but it looks like they are accumulating our shares. Whitford narrowed his eyes. Accumulating how much we do not know yet. Whitford shot up from his chair, face red with fury. How can you not know who is buying our shares? A $20 billion company being monitored like a corner grocery store. Silence fell over the room. Another member sighed. The shares are being bought through dozens of different legal entities. No one knows who the real owner is. Whitford stumbled back into his leather chair, his eyes darkening. No, impossible. No one is bold enough to play a game like this with me. Meanwhile, in New York, Ethan was watching that very meeting through an internal leak forwarded to Rachel. Rachel set the laptop on the table. You need to see this. Ethan watched Whitford's drained, panicked face. The face of a man used to living at the top, now feeling himself fall for the first time. Rachel said, "He is losing control, Ethan. We scared him." Ethan replied, "Not enough." Adrian crossed his arms against the table, looking at Ethan. "So what's the next move?" Ethan turned to the large digital board showing the Apex chart. He pointed at a sharp, downward drop. This was the first strike shake the market's confidence. Then he pointed at the shareholder map. This was the second, Susan the internal ally. Adrian nodded. And the third, Ethan turned back, his eyes sharp like obsidian. Create chaos inside the board. The more divided they are, the easier they fall. The next morning, an anonymous email was sent to 12 Apex board members. Subject line, Urgent Confidential Analysis on Corporate Governance. Risks within Apex Holdings. Inside were detailed excerpts of the pension fund deficit analysis of Whitford's failed decisions comparisons, showing Apex's worst in industry performance, and most importantly, a graph showing an unknown shareholder quietly approaching controlling interest. That shareholder was Ethan. But the email did not name him. It simply ended with one line. If Apex does not change leadership, the company will fall. Within an hour, the board erupted like hot oil. One member slammed the table. We cannot let Whitford continue leading. He is dragging this company into the abyss. Another fired back, as if we did not all know that the question is who can replace him. Why not ask the major shareholders, what about Susan? She seems aligned with reform. Then someone said the sentence that froze the entire room. The silent buyer might be preparing a takeover. The atmosphere shattered like glass. One person whispered, "We are being hunted." Across the ocean, Ethan Brooks sat in the North Star office, calmly drinking coffee. Rachel laughed, unable to contain her amazement. "You did not say a word, and they tore themselves apart." Adrian nodded. "This is divide and conquer at its finest." Ethan simply said, "The more fragmented the board becomes, the easier the final strike will be." While the board spiraled into chaos, Whitford called an emergency meeting in London. He looked 10 years older, his voice rough. "We must find who is behind this, and eliminate him." One member asked, "Who do you think has the motive?" Whitford gritted his teeth. "Someone who wants to destroy me." But he chose the wrong opponent. At that moment, the secretary rushed in with a sealed envelope. Whitford tore it open. One sheet of paper, 2 lines. "Mr. Whitford, when you threw me off seat high, you thought I was just a passenger." Whitford read it 3 times. His face shifted from red to pale to ghost white. Someone asked, "Do you know who this is?" Whitford replied, voice shaking, "I have a feeling. And if it is, who I think..." He could not finish. He could not say the name. He could not admit the terrifying truth forming in front of him. He had thrown out the wrong man, a man with enough power to destroy his entire empire. At North Star, Rachel entered the room. "Ethan," she said. "Internal sources say Whitford is getting scared." Ethan did not turn. He only looked out the window. "It is time," he whispered. "Time for Apex to learn the name of the man they tried to discard from their plane." The chapter ends with Ethan standing before the glass wall, the evening light cast across his face. Not the light of a man driven by hatred, but of someone who understands that justice is never given. Justice must be built. And sometimes, justice must be won. That morning, Wall Street in New York was so cold that every breath turned into white mist. But on the 50th floor of North Star Capital, the air was even colder. Cold from absolute silence. Cold from what was about to happen. Ethan Brooks stood before the massive glass wall, hands in his pockets, staring down at the streets that pulsed like the city's bloodstream. He wore a razor-sharp black suit and a silver-grey tie. Anyone who looked at him would feel that something far larger than the man standing there was about to unfold. Today was not an ordinary day. Today the ghost would reveal its name. Rachel stepped in, holding a red folder. "Ethan, everything is ready. All we need is your signature." Adrian followed behind her, looking like an attorney preparing to enter the highest court in the country. Form 13D, the disclosure of any ownership above 5% of Apex shares. Once you sign, we will file to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Financial Conduct Authority in London at the same time. Ethan turned his eyes still and dark like a night lake. After this filing, Rachel said the entire market will finally know who has been behind Operation Spectre. Ethan gave a faint smile, not of joy, but the kind of smile that seals fate. "It is time." He signed. One short, decisive signature like the final stroke of a blade that closed the months-long silent war. 8:30 in the morning in New York, 13:30 in the afternoon in London. 2 emails were sent simultaneously. One to the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. one to the Financial Conduct Authority in the United Kingdom. Attached were Schedule 13, deconfirming how North Star Capital now owned 20% of Apex Holdings. Campaign lead Ethan Michael Brooks. Seconds later, boom. An invisible explosion rippled across the global financial system. The Reuters newsroom caught the alert, first breaking, North Star Capital announces 28% stake in Apex Holdings. Bloomberg followed instantly. Hostile move, United States billionaire Ethan Brooks targets Apex board. The Financial Herald splashed a giant red headline, "The ghost has a name." Traders in Apex's own trading floor jumped to their feet as the big board flickered. Apex stock skyrocketed, soared fast, not because anyone trusted Whitford, but because the market believed Ethan would do what Apex never dared lead properly. In the old stone building in London, Charles Whitford was in the middle of a meeting, still thinking he could contain the situation. A pale assistant rushed in. "Mr. Whitford, you need to see this." Whitford frowned, snatched the tablet, and the moment he read the first line, the colour drained from his face. North Star Capital's Ethan Brooks reveals controlling stake in Apex Holdings. The room froze as though time had stopped. One board member whispered, "Brooks, the one from the email, the one who has been attacking us?" Another director stammered, What did you even do to make an American billionaire target our company?" A name flashed through Whitford's mind like lightning. "Ethan Brooks." "Brooks' seat? Hey, no impossible," he whispered. "Do you know this person?" someone asked. Whitford could not speak. In his mind, Melissa's voice echoed. "It's always people like him." And now he knew. He knew exactly who he had thrown off that plane, and that mistake was returning like a tsunami. 30 minutes later at North Star headquarters, Ethan's phone rang non-stop. Journalists calling, investment funds calling, CEOs requesting meetings, banks offering partnerships, pension funds asking to align with him. Ethan answered none of them. He only watched the news showing a world in shock. Rachel shook her head as she watched the headlines. "They are calling you the silent raider, the quiet conqueror." Adrian laughed loudly. No, call him the man they kicked off the plane. Ethan did not laugh. He simply said, "No one gets kicked out of a place where they belong." Meanwhile, Apex Holdings was spiraling into unprecedented chaos. An emergency meeting was called barely 30 minutes after the news broke. A boardroom once arrogant and polished now looked like a crisis ward. 28%. What does that even mean? How much control do we still have? Can we block him? Who is siding with whom? Angry voices overlapped, panicked breathing. Finally someone shouted, "We need to talk to Brooks. Call him Whitford." Pale as chalk snapped. No one calls him. But the board no longer listened. A younger member slammed the table. "Whitford, you let this company fall into disaster. If he wants to talk, we listen." Another stood abruptly. "I call for a vote of no confidence." The room exploded into chaos. Whitford slammed the table one last time. No one has the authority. At that moment, the door opened. Susan Markley walked in, unnervingly calm. "I have the authority," she said. And she placed her letter on the table. "I officially call for an extraordinary shareholder meeting, and I support a full review of Chairman Whitford's position." The room fell dead silent. Everyone understood. Without Susan, the uprising was weak. But with Susan, Apex was truly about to change ownership. Whitford could barely stand. You betrayed me." Susan looked at him, not with hatred, but with sorrow. "No, Charles. You betrayed this company long ago." At the same time, back at North Star, Rachel rushed in. "Ethan, the extraordinary shareholder meeting is confirmed." Susan filed the request. Ethan rose straight-backed, meaning Rachel smiled. "Meaning the next chairman of Apex is about to be decided," Ethan whispered. "And this time, no one will throw me out of anywhere." He tightened his grip on the folder in his hand, the folder containing his full restructuring plan for Apex after replacing Whitford. A plan born from a single moment when someone looked down on him in first class. And now the world was about to witness the strongest answer ever delivered in financial history. London, 9 o'clock in the morning. A thin, silver mist covered the stone pavement of Mayfair. The Seabourn Grand Hotel, where Apex Holdings' extraordinary shareholder meeting was taking place, glowed under golden lights, like a palace preparing for the execution of an old king. Reporters crowded outside. Cameras flashed non-stop. The news ticker read, "Judgment Day, Ethan Brooks versus Charles Whitford." And at the center of that storm, Ethan Brooks stepped out of a sleek black car. No bodyguards, no entourage, only a sharp black suit eyes, calm like a lake before a storm, and a presence strong enough to part the crowd without touching a single person. A reporter shouted, "Mr. Brooks, is it true you are seeking to remove Chairman Whitford today?" Ethan did not answer. He simply smiled the faint smile of a man who already knew the outcome. He walked inside. The heavy doors closed behind him like the final nails sealing a coffin. Inside the vast conference hall, lights poured over a long table with 13 seats, the board of directors' domain. On both sides sat hundreds of shareholders, each holding enough power to decide the fate of a $20 billion empire. The air was thick, tense like a stretched wire. No one spoke loudly. Everyone seemed to be waiting for a verdict. On the large central screen, the words appeared, "Apex Holdings, Extraordinary Shareholder Meeting." Destiny was about to be rewritten that morning. Charles Whitford entered through the back door. He looked visibly older than during his last public appearance. Hollow cheeks, dark circles, silver hair unkempt. His expensive suit could not hide the slight tremor in the hands trying to grip his documents. He had faced many enemies in his life, but never a fear like this. Because this enemy he once believed was just a troublesome passenger. Whitford tried to keep his voice steady. "Let us begin the meeting." But his voice shook. Ethan walked in at that exact moment. The room went silent immediately. Not because he was a billionaire, not because he was the largest shareholder, but because something in him pulled the attention of the entire room toward his presence. Ethan did not look at Whitford. He looked at Susan Markley, his ally. She gave a small nod, the signal that everything was in place. Then Ethan took his seat in the first shareholder row, the seat reserved for the one holding the company's destiny. Whitford began his speech. He talked about legacy, tradition, everything he built, and the threat of an outsider trying to steal a British company. He spoke at length. So long that some people began to yawn, and that only highlighted the difference between him and Ethan Whitford, clung to the past to save himself. Ethan came to build the future. When Whitford finally ended his long-winded speech, Ethan rose. No microphone, no slides, just one man standing in a bright room, his voice deep like a cello. "Good morning." 2 words. The entire room fell silent. No camera flash, no dramatic effect, only pure, absolute attention. Ethan began, "I am not here to talk about legacy. I have no legacy to brag about. I will not talk about tradition either. Tradition doesn't feed shareholders." A few chuckled. Ethan continued, I am here for the future. For a great company being dragged down by conservatism, by secrecy, and by deliberate mistakes. His eyes locked onto Whitford. I say this with respect, but with no hesitation. Mr. Whitford has failed. A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Whitford's face drained of colour. Ethan continued, still calm but sharp as ice. A collapsed pension fund, failed acquisitions, a stock in steep decline, an airline run on arrogance and prejudice. Every eye was on him, and worst of all, a board led by fear instead of vision. Then he placed a black folder on the table. This is my plan reform. Zenith Air appoint, new leadership, bring full transparency to the pension fund, build a path for sustainable growth, and place Susan Markley as lead director. Susan lifted her head, not to thank him, but in acknowledgement. Ethan continued, I am not here to destroy Apex. I am here to save it from Mr. Whitford's mistakes. The air felt frozen. Then Ethan delivered the line that made the entire room shiver if Mr. Whitford believed that someone like me did not deserve Sithe. Then today I am here to remind him of one thing I do not want. Sithe. I want his seat. A silent explosion. No one breathed. No one moved. Whitford shouted, This is slander. This is a coup. This is Ethan. Turned and looked at him. One glance, and Whitford fell silent. You had your chance to lead, Ethan. Said quietly. You chose to hide behind tradition. I choose responsibility. The room began to stir. Then Susan Markley stood. I formally call for a vote to remove Chairman Charles Whitford. A board member rose. I second it. Then another, and another, and another. The last one to stand was Whitford himself, not to vote, but because his legs could barely hold him as the world turned against him. Voting began. The large screen displayed votes to remove Chairman Whitford, 82%. Whitford nearly collapsed. He gripped the table for support. Ethan remained, still, not triumphant, not smiling, silent. Because he knew this was not a victory for one man, it was a victory for truth. The presiding officer stood. Result: Charles Whitford is hereby removed as chairman of Apex Holdings. Applause erupted, growing louder, stronger, echoing through the hall. Ethan rose, walked toward Whitford. The old man trembled, voice breaking. Who are you? Ethan leaned in, speaking softly enough for only the two of them to hear. The man you kicked off your plane. Whitford's eyes widened. Ethan added, That day you told me I did not belong there. Today I am here to remind you that power has nothing to do with the seat you sit in, and everything to do with how you treat people. Then he turned and walked away. A new era began. As Ethan stepped out of the hall, reporters lifted their cameras. Flashes filled the air like lightning. No one knew what he was thinking, but if they looked deep enough into his eyes, they would see a storm had ended, and a new chapter stronger and more just had already begun. After becoming the new chairman of Apex Holdings, Ethan Brooks stood beside the glass wall of the executive conference room, looking down at the city like a living universe in motion beneath his feet. News had spread across Wall Street faster than a storm the man once thrown out of Seat High now controlled the entire corporation that owned Zenith Air. Social media erupted. News outlets ran non-stop coverage. Financial programs analyzed the silent takeover strategy that had shaken the market. But Ethan did not celebrate, did not go on television, did not wear the victory on his shoulders. The first thing he did was open his laptop log into the internal system and search for the 3 names that had brought him to this very moment: Ronald Keane, the chief executive officer of Zenith Air, Captain Warren Hale, the pilot, and Melissa Carter, the chief flight attendant. Justice to Ethan was not growling anger, nor petty revenge. Justice was precision, and it was coming. The next morning, Ronald Keene was sipping a cappuccino in his luxurious walnut-paneled office when his assistant rushed in, pale as paper. "The new chairman of Apex wants to speak with you immediately." Keene straightened his tie, tried to remain composed, and opened the video call. Ethan appeared on screen, his face calm as an untouched lake. "Good morning, Ronald." His voice was calm, dangerously calm. Keene's hand twitched. "I want to discuss a decision you made 6 months ago," Ethan said. "Your choice to dismiss a discrimination report as if it were merely a nuisance." Keene rushed to defend himself. Blamed the crew, called it a misunderstanding, mentioned the $500 voucher the company sent out. Ethan leaned back, his gaze cold as a blade. $500 for humiliation, Ronald. You misjudged the man your company threw off that plane." A pause. "And now you are terminated, effective immediately." Keene panicked, tried to speak, but Ethan had already ended the call. The entire conversation lasted 40 seconds. 40 seconds to end a career that once climbed to the top. The following day, Captain Warren Hale was called into an internal meeting. He believed it was a routine review. But when the door closed, he found himself facing 3 executives and a large screen replaying the footage of him forcibly removing Ethan from the aircraft. Hale's face turned white. The new chief executive of Zenith Air looked at him, not angry, only disappointed. "For years you resolved conflicts by choosing the easiest route, siding with your crew even when they were wrong. And you called that safety. They showed him the numbers his flights held, double the complaint rate of the fleet. The company's compensation payouts had risen steadily because of his rash decisions. You are a liability to the company, Captain." Hale gripped the documents until the pages bent. "So what happens to me? 2 options, office duty or retirement." Hale said nothing. He understood. And in the end, he chose to leave quietly, a fitting ending for a man who had stood with prejudice instead of justice. But the harshest fall came for Melissa Carter. When Ethan became chairman, she had no idea what was unfolding. She had just finished a domestic flight, still carrying the pride of having maintained order 6 months ago. But when she walked into Zenith Air headquarters, HR summoned her immediately. Maria Jones, the new head of human resources, a black woman with bright eyes and a demeanor that did not allow deception, sat waiting. On the table was a thick file. Very thick. "We have reviewed all of your behavior," Maria said. Melissa forced a smile, tried to justify I was stressed. I was just following regulations. But Maria opened the folder passenger videos. Ethan's report, past complaints from black passengers, statements from other flight attendants, everything laid bare. "You did not enforce regulations," Maria said slowly. "You enforced your own fear and prejudice." Melissa broke down crying, but tears were not enough to erase consequences. Her termination was signed that same day. Melissa walked out of the office she had entered proudly for 20 years this time, with shoulders so heavy they seemed to carry her entire life. The media storm arrived immediately afterward. When reporters learned Melissa was the one who had thrown Ethan off the plane, social media exploded. The name Melissa Carter appeared everywhere, not as a victim, but as a symbol of arrogance and discrimination. Analysis videos, viral hashtags, furious commentaries all hit her like a hailstorm. And when a local TV station found Melissa working as a cashier at a discount grocery store in suburban New Jersey, Her face gaunt and her eyes exhausted, she said through tears, "I misjudged a man, and it cost me my whole life." Ethan watched the interview in silence. Not pleased, not triumphant, just quietly sad. He never intended for her to lose everything, but he understood we cannot control the consequences of what we choose to sow. After clearing out the rot, Ethan began rebuilding Zenith Air. He poured hundreds of millions of dollars into staff training, redesigned the entire first-class, cabin-launched scholarship programs for pilots, and young engineers from underserved communities, replaced the executive team, and built a culture of respect, the very principle he was denied in that brief moment in Sat High A. Susan Markley was appointed into Apex Holdings, top leadership spearheading sweeping reforms. Zenith Air was reborn under the man they once told, "You do not belong here." 1 year later, Ethan Brooks sat once again in Seat High, this time on the brand new A350 aircraft he personally approved. The first-class cabin glowed with warm light, luxurious but never arrogant. A young flight attendant, Alyssa Reed, approached with a sincere smile. "Chairman Brooks, would you prefer champagne or water?" Ethan looked at her then, out the window where New York was sinking into a sunset like molten gold. He smiled. "Just water. Thank you." Not because he wanted simplicity, but because he understood victory doesn't come from champagne or bragging. Victory comes from the quiet strength of someone who knows their worth, even when others once refused to see it. Seat High A. The place they once tried to throw him out of. Today, it belonged to him completely, not because he was richer, stronger, or more powerful, but because he chose the path that brought justice back to where it belonged. And the story of Ethan Brooks became a warning to every system, every company, every person. Never underestimate someone you do not understand, because sometimes they are the ones who hold your future in their hands. From the perspective of an expert in power culture and organizational dynamics, the story of Ethan Brooks reveals a timeless truth. Real power doesn't lie in the seat you occupy. It lies in the way the world is forced to treat you. A system can hide its flaws, it can shelter its privileges, but it cannot hide from the light of truth when someone with enough integrity stands up. Ethan did not retaliate with anger. He corrected the system with discipline, with transparency, and with principle. And that is the essence of leadership, not breaking things to take revenge, but breaking the old structure to rebuild it the right way. If this story resonates with you, please like the video to spread the message that dignity must never be dismissed. And if you want to continue following more journeys that expose injustice and rebuild fairness, press subscribe. Just one touch is enough to make sure you never miss any powerful story ahead. Finally, leave a short but meaningful comment. Hold your dignity to remind one another that in every moment of life, the one thing no one is ever allowed to take from you is your human worth.